Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and welcome to another episode of Mental Health Matters, where we openly talk about mental health. This week we've got some wonderful guests talking about anxiety and counselling. Before I start, I'd like to introduce you our guest. First guest I've got is someone who is an entrepreneur, registered nurse in specialist in accidental emergency medical trauma, running his own company. He's been a tutor for Open University on the MBA program, registered counsellor, and a specialist in many areas, including personal development and life coaching. I'd like to say a warm welcome to Tariq Hayat.
Hello, thank you, and Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal to you. Second person on our show, a multi-award-winning established entrepreneur, Forbes judge and mentor, chairman of SeekEntrepreneur.com, an international speaker, Forbes Under 30 judge in 2017-2018, a go-to mentor on growing business, being on TV, radio, being a guest speaker on the prestigious TED Talk, NLP master trainer. Guys, his words do not do this guy justice. Mr. Suki Waliwala. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down and gracing us with your presence. Tariq, just a bit about yourself. I know I've read off quite a bit of chunk here for you. Just in your own words.
It's kind of I wear many hats. My background is in nursing. I started off as a nurse specialising in A&E, but then I went on into a career in business and business education. And in recent times, I've returned to my nursing roots, and now I've also been practicing as a counsellor for the last couple of years. I'm a BACP registered counsellor. So I wear many different hats, but it gives me a very wide experience working with a number of different people from various communities.
Wow, it seems really interesting, especially working in the NHS, being quite a busy environment. And
yeah, it can be, and especially as you know, A&E is quite a difficult place to work in the best of times.
So this topic of anxiety is quite
yes,
quite prevalent.
Yeah, it is an interesting area.
And Sukiji, thank you for coming on the show.
My personal pleasure, Herbal.
And so by all means, what the words I've said about you do not give me justice, but just for the viewers at home, just a bit about you, how things have been.
I think your words are overdone the justice, should I say. With myself, I'm kind of like an entrepreneur, but I've spent many thousands of hours working with individuals on evolving their businesses, and also then within that I've had the grace of working as a coach, or as now a qualified mentor as well for Forbes as well, with Maharaj the Kirpa. So I'm just here to try and touch as many people as I possibly can with their psychology, to try and give them a change, to try and assist them and support them.
Well, thank you guys. We've got a really fantastic lineup for you. Just to let you know, our lines will be open later on. You can ring in and talk to Suki and Tariq about the issues that we're talking about today, and hopefully we'll answer the questions for you. Tariq, I'll start off with you first of all. You mentioned you've qualified as a BSCP counsellor.
Yeah.
What is counselling?
Counselling takes many forms, but if we use the BACP definition as a place to start, if you like, it's about a talking therapy, a therapeutic conversation, and actually looking to kind of make changes in people's lives through that conversation, and also hopefully improve their well-being. But I think counselling takes many different forms. There's formal counselling, where you're in a session with a qualified counsellor. But quite often, a lot of counselling happens between members of different families, friends, just the opportunity to speak about difficulties or problems.
So what's the difference between talking to someone who's a professional like you and talking to someone down the pub?
I think there's a framework, and that's the most important thing. I think there's an ethical code that we work with as counsellors, as BACP counsellors, where we have complete confidentiality. We're also trained specialists in what we do, and it's important when you're dealing with vulnerable people with difficult topics, often quite very, very personal, that the people have to feel safe, that they're opening themselves up to somebody, and therefore everything needs to be confidential. And also we're trained in various different techniques, because not every technique works for every person. In my case, I'm an integrative counsellor, so sometimes it's effectively a toolbox, and what we use is various different tools from that toolbox to support people depending on what their individual need is.
So, as a counsellor, as an integrative counsellor, what is a typical session like? How does it work? Is it
Well, the important thing to mention is that accessing counselling is the biggest step that a person can take. So it's actually a very brave step. To recognise that they need to talk to somebody about their problems is actually a very important moment in that person's life. So accessing the service would be something like through your GP, through a charity, sometimes through religious organisations, through various websites like the BACP, or another one, Anxiety UK is another one that has access to counsellors. But actually, once the person's made that decision they then find a counsellor. At that point, make an appointment. It'll be the session will take place in a specialist area or in the person's home. It can be anywhere. Often nowadays technology is also coming into play. There's Skype counselling, telephone counselling. So there's a number of different ways that can be delivered. But the most important thing is in a standard session of counselling is the client will arrive for the session. The session will take 50 minutes. And during that time, the counsellor will, depending on their individual way of working, will look to do something like an initial assessment, or basically just ask the simple question, what's brought you here today, and begin that therapeutic relationship.
What about confidentiality in that relationship? Because it seems like if you're talking one way and telling everyone what's going on, is it confidential enough?
It absolutely. If the client is seeing a registered counsellor, either with BACP or UKCP or any of the recognised bodies in the UK, it is absolutely the core tenement of counselling that everything that is said in the session remains confidential. So it's one of the absolute tenets of counselling, that it is a confidential service.
So if you had someone who's from the Asian background coming to you and going, I've got a lot to talk about, but I'm worried that my next door neighbour is going to find out, what advice would you give to them?
I think the important thing is making sure that the client feels safe, and at that point you'd need to consider where they live. Let's find out the geography. If the counsellor happens to live in the same location as the client, you have to try and avoid any kind of possible contact, or possibly the client being seen going to the counselling session. So we have to look at sort of practical stuff, like making sure that you find a therapist that's far enough away from friends and family to be able to access the service, but also keep it confidential through leakage, if you like, through accidental discovery. But the most important thing is that every client that comes through the door has complete confidentiality, and this is really important for the viewers at home to know, that anybody accessing counselling, it is a completely confidential service.
Just going on from there, how many clients do you have from the Asian community?
At the moment, I have none. At the moment, it's a service that clients from the Asian community tend to be a little bit wary of, a little bit reticent to come forward. I think it's an area. It's one of the reasons why we're doing this program this evening, to actually say to the viewers that it is not a shame. There's nothing to worry about by talking about problems, because everybody has problems, and actually by recognising you have a problem and talking about it to a professional, that's the beginning of healing, the beginning of change.
So, okay, I'd like to open the question up to you about people talking to professionals, and why is there such a problem in the Asian community?
Do you know, genuinely, I think there's a sense of failure that seems to be attached to, I would say, needing assistance from other people. Once upon a time, I'll explain, it's what we found in my own research and our own work within our own communities, and assistance within the business community as well, that if we went back, let's say 1 decade, or even let's say 2 decades, you'd be in a situation where the infrastructure, the support structure of the community within itself, at large within itself, was very supportive. So what happened is, if there was a challenge, it was like, if it was not your parents, it would be your grandparents or somebody of that nature from the local community, whichever community we talk about. And sadly, what's happened is that due to modern life, the speed of modern life, the disassociation of modern life, and what's happened is that we've actually become solo units. Irony is that we tend to think our friends are the people on Facebook and the likes we get on our Instagram, etc., as opposed to the real human interactive individuals we find. So what I found in the past, in my experience of best part of the sort of 12,000 hours now working with individuals with Paramatma's honour. It's actually about installing and adding another community. The reality is I'm trying to create a community that people can actually lean on to redefine the support requirements that they require for success, for mindset, for self-evolution. Does that make sense? And to be one of my core tenets, should I say, is it's not about just creating leaders. It's something a little bit deeper. All I'm trying to do, and I think this is a genuine understanding from our Sikhi background of Sikhism, and most faiths that I speak, in fact, I've no medical faith that hasn't got the same tenet. The moment that a human being, with God's grace and self-discipline and self-divergence in exploration within themselves, once their self-ignition or ignition for self-responsibility happens, this is when things completely change within their world, and the results in life change as well. So that's kind of a little simple understanding. So I go around the world, and I've got a little mission of, with God's blessings, hopefully at some stage in my life I'll touch 1 million people's lives somewhere along the line and assist them to be aware of themselves a little bit more, and more importantly, just see how valuable that they are truly to this world, so that we can actually ignite their self-responsibility to the world.
Harper, can I just come in? Sorry, just to come back to the question you asked me earlier about how many Asian clients I work with, and I think this is a really valuable point, if I may. And following on from what Suki's already said, one of the things, I have done some work with the Asian community a few years ago with a drop-in centre for people in East London. It's a Muslim drop-in centre. It wasn't a specifically Muslim drop-in centre, but the clientele seemed to be Muslim. Lots of elderly men, and from my conversations with them, which weren't specifically therapeutic to start with, they became therapeutic. And one of the key things that came out of this, and these are guys in their 70s and 80s, was the impact of partition. The impact of the partition. And I think it's only now, and I don't know if you've come across this, Suki, is that the impact of the partition has been with a number of these gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen for many, many years, and it's been repressed, and nobody's talked about it. And obviously, I'm a Muslim background. I know you guys are from a Sikh background, and both communities were affected by this in terms of the partition. If you like, the trauma
partition
of
of 19...
For the viewers at home, we are talking about the partition of India and
Pakistan. I'm sorry, yes.
1947.
1947 partition. And at that point, a lot of people were very, very hurt and damaged psychologically. And it's only now in their later years that they've been able to start to talk about it. And as therapy and as people get a bit more open, and we understand psychological problems more, a lot of these older people are only just beginning to talk about their traumatic experiences.
So Suki, you're talking about the partitions over 50 odd years now?
70
years.
70 years. 1947. 71 years this year.
Yeah, and within 2017 to 18 this year. That must be producing quite a lot of anxiety for people.
Yes. Well, do you know, I think there's anxiety and there's delayed anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an anxiety that comes through in later years of life. That's right,
exactly.
Barry. So, to start off with, of course they wouldn't. They would not have that anxiety showing up in the world, because both the mothers, the grandparents, the children themselves, and the parents themselves, whether male, female, no sex specific, they all went through atrocities on both sides.
Yes.
So when Indo-Pakistan, we're just talking about this one particular process, particular time and partition. My own parents were involved in that as well. They moved over from an area on the other side of Pakistan, the whole area, over into Delhi. Now, the reality is that they had deaths in the family. They had people who they never really truly mourned or grieved over. Does that make sense? And sometimes it's just the share of just sharing what their journey was, and the wonderfulness. And yes, this actually all promotes some stage or another anxiety of some kind. And obviously we have the clarity of what actually anxiety truly could be. But I'll leave that flow to yourself.
Well, you might as well continue. What is anxiety for? In
a simplistic way. I want to deliver it in a very non-academic way for a particular reason, so that we could share in a real humble way within the whole organisation and whole community. Because it sometimes it always shows up in practical elements. So it shows up in our ways of doing things. Sometimes we'll be doing a simple task, like a household simple task, and feel uncomfortable in doing it for a second. You know, just start thinking, well, actually, I don't want to speak to somebody on the phone. It's starts with the littlest of things, and then slowly, it just shows up in your world in different ways. Now, it's nothing to do with an idle brain or a structure of that sort of thing. It's just how you haven't absorbed, you've not released it from your fibers, from your psychology within your body. Now, whether you use any toolbox in specific, whether it's neurosciences, whether it's using NLP, whether you're using the absolute tried and tested ways of counselling, I will just applaud everybody. You really need to get help, because it's not a shame, which is what we were trying to think about earlier on. The shame, there's no shame in that. The shame is if you don't help yourself. That's the real true shame in health.
It's amazing, Suki, and both Suki and Tariq, our guests here, have said it's not shameful asking for help, it's shameful not asking for help. It's a big send-home message, especially for those who actually want to process the anxieties. And we're touching more with both of the guests on anxiety and how it's, what it is. What is anxiety? Is someone says I'm anxious or anxiety, Tariq?
I think we need to think about anxiety as a spectrum. Okay, so I think anxiety is part of the natural human condition. So if you think about it, if you're about to meet somebody for a first date, there's a bit of anxiety about meeting that person, or if your football team are in the cup final, there's anxiety about whether they're going to win or not. That's kind of normal, natural anxiety, which is there for a little while, and then you have the date or you have the football match, and it sort of dissipates. But then where it becomes a problem for people is when it becomes a part of life, and it becomes part of the background of life, if you like. So there are a number of different forms of anxiety. So, for example, it's just generalised anxiety, where people are very nervous and just generally twitchy, and they find it difficult kind of functioning in some ways. Then there's social anxiety, and then you go on further down the spectrum to things like phobias, things like what we call OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. For example, somebody has to wash their hands 50 times. There's a difference between that and my personal little OCD, which is every time I lock the door, I go back and double check it. And I think there's a big difference between that and having to wash your hands 50 times when you've touched the door. And then you can move on to more difficult anxieties, such as post-traumatic stress, which is something we've touched on about the partition, for example. Some of these older people have been living with post-traumatic stress, having seen parents murdered or loved ones lost, and never had the chance to talk about it, often at a young age. If we're talking 70 now, a lot of these people will be 9, 10, 11 when they saw this happen. So these are the so anxiety is a spectrum, and it's important to recognise when it becomes debilitating, when it becomes that the anxiety takes over our life, and that's the important thing. And when that does happen, it's the time to seek help or to explore what's caused that.
So, okay, just a question I was just checking with you is, we're talking about anxiety, but what does it feel like to be anxious?
This is quite interesting, because at this moment there are a lot of A-levels going on, a lot of exam time. So if I could just claw it back just a little bit, because I'm going to come away from all the jargon, if I may, just to share, because I want to keep it in the same vein that Tariq's just been sharing, really simple to understand. So if I come away from all that context, I'm just going to share very simply. If you are actually anxious, you won't actually feel it, and you won't actually know it. You'll be in a position where you'll be rehabilitated in some way. So it could well be all of a sudden you'll notice a little habit. Once upon a time, we're talking about social anxiety, we were just talking about. So you might decide not to go out too often. So you'll find that yourself rejecting and saying no to a friend. I know, I'll come out tomorrow. And there's no real reason for it besides you just don't feel like you want to go out to start off with. So it starts off with what we call a bit of a feeling within yourself, and it's a gut. So if you're into the centrics of chakras and energy, it's the stomach energy around the heart area, where you tend to sort of like just to feel a little bit of void, and you think, I'm tired. And sometimes it brings up external, I'm not sure if I can share this in an easy way, but external physical attributes. You may be thinking about going out with your family, or going out with somebody in specific, or meeting a future a partner or a family member or a business meeting or a deal, and all of a sudden you start getting the butterflies and you start thinking in a different way, and what you do is you regress from that idea, and then it actually starts, you start getting that nervous twitch as well. Okay, so that's just to explain what it's like. Now, if I could give an example, I was talking, would you believe, only this morning to my own second oldest daughter, Amanjot Kaur, and we had this discussion around her exam. I said, look, if I could just share, because this exam season, could I use that as a framework?
Yeah, by all means. I'm sure there's be loads of viewers at home who are either sitting exams or know someone who will be sitting exams. So this will be very, very useful information.
Thank you. So, I didn't actually thank you for being on the show, so thank you very much for having me on the show as well myself.
You're welcome.
So, in context of this, with my younger daughter, she was talking very specifically, and she was very nervous, and she was very twitchy. And I tell you, she's a very, very, very academic, but also a very hard-working soul. So, even when you have the ability, the skills, the intellect to pass your exams, somehow anxiety kicks in and it makes you think that you're not worthy or you're not capable. So if I could just bring in a simple 3-4 steps, it's anxiety is a prequel to stress. When we get stressed over something, it's because we're visualizing something going wrong in just a very simple way. So if I was to suggest that it was an exam, so I'm getting anxious about my exam, so I'm thinking about the worry of the exam, etc. But the reality is that you're really just focusing on the fact that you might not pass the exam. So it's the outcome that we're visualizing within our own mind and we're feeling that I think I'm going to fail. So the closer you get to sitting the exam, the closer you get to actually working the answers out, the more you're going to get anxious because you're thinking, I am going to fail. So my daughter doesn't have that problem, but she was just kind of a little bit upset about a few things, and logically, she had an exam for the first exam, so it's always the first one. And if I could change that context of being like a cliff edge, the closer you step towards that cliff edge, you're going to have 2 outcomes. One, if you visualize yourself enjoying the view and seeing a beautiful river, let's say at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, some 2,000 or 4,000 feet down, then you're going to be excited to get there with every step. But if you visualize yourself falling off the edge, if you can imagine this, and I'm being very simplistic, my apologies if there's any, I hope I'm not being abrasive in this context, but if you visualize it as though you're going to fall off the edge, every single step will increase anxiety with the stress outcome of I'm going to fall off the edge. Does that make sense? So as you're getting closer. So if you can start to, as a practical tip, write down pen and paper. There's a gentleman called Professor Cartesian, and he speaks about a logic of what I've redefined within the Synegus method, the methodology I've been writing. It's think it, write it, see it. It's a 3-step process. So
think it, write it, see it.
See it.
So you think about it, you write it down, and then you visualize it from there. We've had a course, Sukibaji, and I know your Punjabi is much better than mine. What is a Punjabi translation for anxiety?
Right, for anxiety, when it comes to Punjabi, it's about it's quite complex. There isn't actually a direct replacement to it, from my understanding. It's about, if I can say it in Punjabi, or shall I for the viewers?
Yeah, please.
So anxiety is like when जब इंसान सोचता है कि कोई नुकसान होने लगा है, कि ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਡਰ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਪੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਢਿੱਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਤੇ ਉਸ ਦੀ ਆਊਟਕਮ ਹੈ, ਮਤਲਬ ਬੰਦਾ ਸੋਚਦਾ ਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਪੈਣੀ ਹੈ, ਕਿ ਕੁਝ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਹੈ. So when we're thinking about how things are going to go wrong, so it's like the visualization of the outcome, which in Punjabi is an easier way to explain it.
कभी जो इंग्लिश लफ्ज़ होंदे हैं ना, और डायरेक्ट ट्रांसलेशन नहीं होंदा है. कभी सानू ਉਹਦੇ ਜੋ ਅਰਥ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਉਹ ਬਣਾਉਣੇ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ. ਬਟ ਯਾ ਪਲੀਜ਼
ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਨੁਕਸਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨੀ, ਕਿ ਬੰਦਾ ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਊਟਕਮ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੋਚ 'ਚ ਉਹ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ. ਕਦੇ ਉਹ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਗਲਤ ਹੋਣ ਲੱਗਾ, ਤੇ ਉਸ 'ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬੰਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਹੈ ਨਾ.
We mentioned the older generation getting anxiety from post-traumatic environments. We mentioned children now who've going through GCSEs and A-levels. By the way, guys, good luck, and make sure you all get A stars. If you don't,
you just up the anxiety levels in all of these people. Well done.
That's all right. Can anxiety exist is it just between adult youngsters and seniors, or can it be anyone and everyone?
Anyone and everyone. It can. I think sort of following on from what Suki said, it is very much about the mindset that the person feels, and actually, if they believe that something's going to go wrong, or they feel that they can't cope with something, or because basically stress is pressure becomes stress and anxiety go hand in hand basically, and effectively it's kind of an overwhelming pressure that becomes stress, and at that point there's a kind of the technical word is catastrophization, which is, as Suki was saying, are you going to see the Grand Canyon over the cliff, or are you going to fall off of it. And it's very much a case that anybody at any age can feel like that.
Just thinking about falling off the Grand Canyon is giving me butterflies in my stomach. That's
anxiety.
Is it? So what's the difference between anxiety and stress? Or are they the same?
One, I think, is... sorry, beg your pardon.
No, by all means.
So one, I think, is an outcome as opposed to the actual feeling itself. Stress, we visualize stress as an outcome on your body. And it sometimes shows up in physical attributes like, blood flushing, etc., etc. But the anxiety itself is the feeling, the emotion, the prashani, which we were talking about a moment ago, the inner angst of inside our emotions actually twitching inside there. It's in a simple way, that's the easiest way to explain it. So one's a feeling and emotion, one's an outcome.
And also, there's the physicality of anxiety and stress. So, for example, sweaty palms. For example, feeling flushed, feeling hot, feeling anxious, nervous, twitching, movement, involuntary movements, lots of different things. Upset stomachs, another thing that people get nervous about, they want to vomit or they have an upset stomach, irritable bowel syndrome, heart problems, even cancer. The stress and anxiety are documented reasons for, certainly part of the reason why a number of physical illnesses happen.
So if someone is going through a period of time in their life where they're getting these symptoms, what can they do?
Well, the first thing, if I could just have a shout, the first thing they need to do is accept that they're human. Accept that they're actually okay still. Mm-hmm. Don't take it as a negative or it's a loss or a failed. If they're starting to feel these sort of feelings of uncomfortness, of not being so social or hanging out on their own, that kind of thing, they just need to accept the fact that it's kind of, in English would say smell the roses, but I would say they just need to understand that there is an answer. There is a way forward in life. Life it's the tip between depression and the normal life of understanding without depression. So the reality is that they've got to accept that there is some solution for them going forward. And then the second thing is obviously to ensure that they seek help. And I would personally say, without a doubt, as we're saying, go to the GP and just have a good conversation. The GPs are trained to hear this conversation, and then at least take the action. Do not feel the shame of stepping up and going forward, because there's no such thing. Because we are in this life. It's this life that creates heaven on earth. It's us who create our galesh or our essence within our life. Our happiness is here today. There's no plan that we know of yet within Sikhi that teaches us that your next life is going to be better than now if you have an endured pain life now. It's not the case. Now is the time when you should seek help, and everybody's of an equal status, male or female, child or elder. Just because they're looked up to within the family, that can also cause an internal stress and an anxiety within themselves, because, as we said again, it's post-traumatic, but also the fact that they've always got to have the answer, so they can put themselves in a position. So I would say step up and get help without doubt.
Just talking about the Asian community as well, regardless if it's Muslim or Hindu, Sikh, whatever it is. Do we ingrain anxiety into our community, into our kids, into our families, as a natural occurrence?
It's a very interesting question. Multifaceted.
This is a huge question. It very much depends on cultural backgrounds, obviously. The Asian community, people talk about the Asian community, but the Asian community is huge, and it's a wide group of people, a very diverse group of people. But there are certain traits, I think, that we all share in terms of expectations of success, expectations of doing well at things. And I think that the danger with that is that we, by parents or families creating a level of expectation that people will do well, they almost can, if the person doesn't reach that standard that they believe is what the family want, ingrain a sense of failure. And that's where anxiety can come in, because there's an anxiety to please, an anxiety to get to the level that we want. Like I know you jokingly said, good luck to everybody, get your A stars, but actually there are people out there who won't get A stars, and the important thing that matters is that the message to those people is, if you work hard and you do what you can do, if you don't get A stars, it's not the end of the world, it's just where you are at that moment in time. And I think the danger would be, we have to be very careful, because what a lot of people don't realise is that anxiety and depression are on the same continuum. Okay, so at one level you can have anxiety. So if we use Suki's example of I don't want to go out today, I'm feeling anxious about going out, then I'm a bit of a failure, I'm not good enough to go out, and then suddenly we go from anxiety right the way around to the other end, which is depression, which is I'm not a good person, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. And so in a way the two kind of feed each other. So it's very important that I think the Asian community, as I think my impression is that there's a lot of high expectations, and the danger is that we set ourselves up to fail if we're not careful.
Suki, same question to you.
It's a lovely question. So you've answered it so well there, Tarek, but if I could take another angle, if I may, just with authority. I think the question was, do we as Asian community, do we put a lot of pressure on our children? I think it's just any parent, male, female, to any child. We have an expectancy at some stage that what we did or did not achieve, what we were good at, our children should be good at as well. We have an expectancy of what we were not good at, we want our children to be good at as well. So there is an element of any parent. So I'm going to keep it towards the Asian family. Of course it's there as well, but it's in every family from across all communities. But there is actually a reality here. If I could share a message, in my learning, in my studies, in my structure of evidencing how really all these come through, it's when an individual doesn't truly know themselves. This is now on an anxiety level. And if we're talking about parental influence or a parental enforcement on a child, for example, the reality is that parents should take the time to truly learn their children, because that's where the secret is. Their psychometric, their self-code, their own understanding within their psychological control of themselves, how they are as a human being. Now, I explain this within the framework of DISC, and I've used it within the methodology of Synegus, which I use quite regularly, where keeping it simple, DISC is a simple profiling tool. Is a tool that shows you your habits, your behavioral traits, what you feel you're good at, and what you find easy to do in life, and what you find so hard to do. So just because you have maybe a slight difference in learning, so dyslexia, for example, sometimes that can lead to an outcome of anxiety and then stress, and then a deflection totally of I don't want to do anything. So I believe every single child, in my own humble opinion, should be known, should know their own natural self. So if I know myself, I can learn other people, and I can learn to adapt properly. So a parent should take the time out of learning their own children, and the four profiles, if I may share, under DISC philosophy are the dominant character. This is a child or an adult, whoever, a human being, who's also looking for an end goal. They're looking to win all the time. They've got a very dominant attitude. They're not very productive with big groups. They tend to want their own version of the world. They want to stand in their own way. The world is about themselves. By the way, none of these four profiles are wrong or right. They just are you. That's it. So you choose which is yours, which is you naturally, what we call your natural self, and not the mask that we're talking about we put on here, as being a parent, as being a brother, as being a sister, a father, a mother, a parent, a friend, or a spouse even, or a sibling of some kind. Now, that's the dominant character, which tend to be very direct, strong-willed, and very focused on the end goal. And it usually is starting with who the task is for and why I should do this task. Then we have the influencer character, the I, the D, the I. The I character is influencing character. This character is much more jovial, much more fun, much more orientated around having an experiential life. They love to be sociable with people. They tend to be the centre of attraction as well. They love attention. So their unconscious questioning within themselves is, am I still being loved? Am I still popular? And this is the likes and the stuff, and this is where we start to realise the dominant people don't really care about the likes. They think about the likes on their posts, I'm talking. They're more interested in, is it valuable to me, and why? What am I going to gain from those likes?
More of a logical individual then?
The logic comes a bit later. It's more about self-centric.
Okay.
So that's I think you're spot on there. So it's about being self-centric. It's about themselves. What's it for me? What's in it for me, kind of thing. The I tends to spend a lot of time about loving those likes and being very sociable and saying, yeah, I had 300 likes today, or I shared my post went viral today, because it's all about the love orientation. And for them, it's about freedom. It's about having variety in their life. Then we have what we classify as the stability the S stands for stability. These are individuals who are much more connected, they're much more in the emotional realm, and this is where anxiety comes very strongly into their life very quickly, because they tend to be more worriers, more worrying about the outcome of somebody else's life and how they could help them, how could be helpful, how they could support them very well. By the way, these are the toughest characters. They're always perceived within the family, the quiet one who tends to be helpful to everybody as being the weak individual. But in more my research, I find that they're the ones who are actually themselves all the time. So they're very, very strong in their nature. And I, again, not one of these is more powerful than the other or better or worse.
It's a different trait.
Different trait, totally. And with them, with the S's, they're very caring, very loving. And for them, it's about the security and stability of their life, and are things in balance. Then we have the final C, which is compliance or conscientious, as we call it. These individuals are exactly what you said, Harbal. They're much more logical. For them, it's planned. It's a step-by-step progress. Is this in a structure? Is there any logic behind it? Does it make sense? Is it planned? And is it orderly? They are very, very, very focused on details, on facts, figures. Is this robust? Are the information correct? So they are usually what we classify as the true experts, because they spend thousands of hours getting it right. So how does all this relate to being in connection to anxiety? May I connect that back together? So the D and the I, the dominant individual, the I, me, myself person, and the I influencer are both what we classify as the extroverted energies. And an extroverted energy is somebody who pumps themselves up or connects to other human beings to really encourage themselves, to energize themselves. And on the other side, the S and the C energies tend to spend a lot of time in an introverted environment. So if things are tiring, they want to be on their own. They'd rather read a book or do something for themselves, to re-encourage the energy.
That's fantastic, and a great way of simplifying for just for the viewers at home. What is an introvert? What's an extrovert?
Perfect. So an introverted energy is somebody who recharges themselves in a simple way in their own company, in their own soul environment. They tend not to be with people. They don't need other people to keep themselves energized. They'd rather go on their own and just take a few minutes out, relax a little bit, maybe meditate a little bit, maybe focus a little bit. And then you have the extrovert energy, which basically is an individual who wants to spend most of the time with other people. So they'll be amazed when we're sitting on television or with other people. So if they're feeling tired, they should go out and they should meet friends and have a nice little conversation in that sort of process. And so the question here, to connect it to anxiety and the original question of parents, it's very simple. It's like, are what you're asking your child to be, is that based upon your own values as a human being or theirs? So take the time, take the effort to learn your children and realize that they are either introverted energies, extroverted energies, and don't try to change them, because they are who they are. And what we also need to be looking for is, how do I connect with them and how do I support them in being what they want to be in life? With ethics, though, always having the parameters that serve.
There you have it, guys, from Suki himself, saying that you take the time to understand your children, understand what they are, what they know, how they are, what kind of are the introvert, extroverts, but also check in with yourself about how you interact and what it is that makes you anxious or induces your anxiety from there. Just to let you also know, the phone line is now open. We'll be taking live calls for right now, so if you've got any questions for either Tariq or for Suki, or indeed for both of them, please look at the numbers below the screen and give us a ring back, and we'll put you straight through to them. Triggers. What are anxiety triggers, and how can you, I'm not focusing now on not personal, you being anxious yourself, but seeing it in other people. I know you've mentioned washing your hands and everything. So any other triggers that you can see in others to see that they're getting quite anxious?
Really what happens is, I'm going to lean on what Tariq was saying just a moment ago. Tariq, he was mentioning the fact that sometimes people can twitch, sometimes they can wash, but all of these are outcomes. There's a gentleman called Alfred Korzybski, and he trains and says that we as human beings, we are meaning making machines. Every time you make a particular meaning, there is an automatic outcome. Now, anxiety is preceded by a meaning. So the meaning itself is, I cannot do something, or I am not able. So the outcome will be either a physical, emotional, or an energetic field, which what Tariq was talking about earlier on. So I'm going to in my opinion, the trigger could be a multitude of whatever it is. Maybe something that you actually didn't like as a child. Could have been delayed, as we were talking about earlier on. It could be something that once upon a time you overcame something you didn't enjoy, and later in life you decided that doesn't work for me anymore. And when you tried to get involved in standing in front of people, being a team leader, maybe that was what we call an adopted state. And when you get later in life, you probably think, I don't want to do this anymore. We all have that midlife crisis moment, but it's not a crisis, it's a midlife self-questioning, which is what we're talking about. So triggers themselves are anything specifically that shows an outcome of an uncontrollable outcome. So back to yourself, Eric, as well.
Tarek, what's your thoughts on that?
I think building on that, there are numerous triggers, and it really depends on the individual client, depends on the individual person. I was listening to this, I was just remembering a scene from a film called The King's Speech, which is the story of King George VI, who was the father of our Queen, who basically had a terrible speech impediment. And actually, every time he had to public speak, he just literally couldn't speak. But with his family, he was absolutely fine. He had a bit of a stammer. And when there's a particular scene in this film when he talks to his speech therapist about what caused this, and he actually speaks about his father and how he treated him and various other, and some abuse that he'd had as a child, and this had lived with him all the way through and actually became a hamper to him. So there are things that maybe in childhood that can trigger things that stay with us throughout our life. Certainly with some of the phobias, with some of the obsessive compulsive disorders, which are extreme forms of anxiety, we have what we call ritualistic behaviour, where the person has to do certain tasks, certain things at certain times, to the point where their life becomes part of that. So it becomes inbuilt in their daily routine. So it is like the washing your hands 50 times, or it is polishing the silver, twice a day, or whatever it might be. And actually, what tends to happen is that when somebody becomes particularly anxious, so for example, let's say, I don't know, a gas bill comes that they can't pay, or there's some problems within the family, or there's some other trigger, that it could be a number of different things. Something, either a death potentially is a good one as well. That tends to bring out a lot of these behaviours, that actually the person feels secure in the way they behave, in terms of they actually hold on to the anxiety and use it as a source of strength. And that's really important that we understand that, because in therapy, one of the techniques we tend to use with anxiety is to say to people, let's look at this anxiety, let's keep diaries of how you're feeling anxious, when do you feel anxious. And what you tend to find is when you look at the diaries, there's certain times of the day, certain triggers during the day. For example, if they've got a problem with their boss at work, and they're very nervous of their boss, so between the 8 times of say 9 till 5, that's the time that they're most anxious, and that's the time we can look at and say, well, how can we manage that relationship? How can we reduce those levels of anxiety? And actually to say to someone, okay, as therapy goes on, we can look at techniques, for example, where we say, okay, so we're looking to manage this anxiety, or try and work on that anxiety for X amount of hours, and for 1 hour a day you can be as anxious as you like. And actually the person then gets fed up with the anxiety, because they say, okay, between 3 and 4 I'm allowed to be anxious, I don't have to think about it, I can be anxious. And it's almost like the smoker who's not allowed to smoke all day but has smoked 50 in that 1 hour. They almost become sick of the anxiety themselves, and actually manages to dissipate. But it's a long journey to support that client. But the triggers are so diverse, it could be anything.
Just stop you there for a moment. We've got a call coming through. Anji, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, I want to put a question to the panel.
Okay. We're having a bit of a technical problems. It's okay, just coming on to managing.
I can't hear you.
Tarek gracefully here just talked about managing, putting it to 1 hour and just focusing on from there. How would you manage anxiety?
That's a really, really powerful tool, because a lot of the times people tend to, you mentioned smoking and stuff of that nature, they tend to smoke thinking that is a relaxing agent. It's not at all. It's the breathing that's relaxing. Yeah. Okay. It's the breath. We're not actually stuck to the trigger.
Just want to say a quick thing there for you guys. Smoking doesn't relax you, it's the breathing that relaxes you. So
it's actually furthering on that conversation. It's about the conscious breath. It's about being conscious about your actual current breath. Does that make sense? So it's like if I focus on the breathing in and breathing out, that within itself relaxes me. And ironically, smokers, because I'm not a smoker, I'm a Sikh, so I don't smoke, but the smokers themselves, they focus on the breath coming in and going out, and that really relaxes the individual as opposed to the other way around. So it's quite, I think your call is ready?
No, just keep, yeah, so in terms of breathing
Yes.
and being anxious, how important is that?
So breathing as an overcoming of anxiety is absolute core. It's an absolute core. You know when you start to feel these fidgets and you're coming through, when you start to get conscious about, remember we were just talking about, Tariq and myself were talking about different triggers. It's about being consciously aware of those triggers. Yeah? And the moment you do get that consciousness or that awareness of the trigger, what you got to do is you can literally hold your breath and give yourself 5 seconds. So take a deep breath and just go, and hold yourself out for 5 seconds and just release the breath coming down. And what happens is just by consciously breathing up and breathing down, this is just simple tools, by the way, I'm sharing in a simple way, so the viewers can actually take something with them. It just allows the body to calm down just a little bit, and more importantly acts as a bit of a distraction, to the actual anxiety itself. And the more you actually start to breathe, which I think is the number one thing we've gone through, there's other therapies and stuff. If you want to self-help yourself, then I would go with the breathing to start off with. But there is also that something that really sits beautifully with what I was sharing earlier on about finding what we call your cause and effect, going right back into the reasoning behind why an anxiety comes through in life, in latter life, how it's defaulted. And this is basically a timeline therapy. And this is when going through a therapy process where you would actually go into some kind of a breathing trance, and then you could actually visualize the reasoning behind it through hypnotherapy. Not hypnosis, I said hypnotherapy. So going back in time and see, is a call right now?
So I think the call's back on there. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? No, okay. No, it's just, I think it's been dropped. Yeah, coming on to, so we talked about breathing, we talked about timeline. Any other methods or we can manage anxiety?
Breathing techniques are absolutely crucial. If you can take yourself, it's recognizing that moment when you are becoming anxious, and that's quite difficult for a lot of people because they don't know, it's become such a part of them that they don't know, or they may be in such a heightened state of anxiety that it's almost very difficult for them to do that. But if you can take a step back from the situation, maybe go into another room, go be outside into the garden or into the street or just a quiet place, and actually just begin to stand, open up your lungs, just take in several, not sort of hyperventilating. It's very important.
Let me try this as we speak.
Yeah.
So let's just do this.
So basically, so it's okay. So it's basically, so you're breathing in through your nose.
Okay.
Okay. And what you're doing is what we would do with clients would be to just really get them into a nice, neutral, relaxed position, just the way you are.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's do this.
That's
do this live.
Yep. That's it. Okay. And then basically, if the client closes their eyes, and then just take in that initial breath through your nose, nice and deeply. Open up and expand your lungs, and then just breathe out really nice and gently through your mouth. And that's it. And let it all come out. Just at that pace, basically. And if the person's doing it on their own, maybe they can think of some positive thoughts. We call it mindfulness, but in a way, what you can do is think about things like just imagine, just feel the ground beneath your feet, feel the air around you, hear the birds singing, listen to the breeze, and just almost close out the rest of the world, just focusing on one or two things. I know Suki will understand from his NLP background. Your body can only take in magic 7 plus or minus 3 senses. So you can smell something, you can feel something, you can touch something. There's actually probably in this room as we sit, there's probably 50 or 60 things happening. I can see you, I can see Suki, I can feel the ground beneath me, I can feel the chair, I can feel the temperature in the room. You can only take on around about 6 or 7 things at the same time. And if we can eliminate some of those and actually just, like you just demonstrated, just relax. And quite often if you can put some soothing music on, or if you're sitting with somebody and they just say some nice things or gentle things to you that just remind you of a park you've been to, or a beach you've experienced, or a sunny morning, or a sunset. These are the kind of things that can actually help dramatically change things and actually reduce blood pressure.
Saying that
And
breathing technique really helped my anxiety. I was fidgeting over there. All right, we'll try again for the caller. Hello? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Can't hear it.
Okay. Yeah, it's...
It's kind of a three-step process. The reality is that first things first, you need to seek some help. Make sure you've got somebody who doesn't condescend you, doesn't push you down, but supports you and says, come on, it's okay, let's go and seek some help. And all we need to do is to work out the trigger, which is what we were talking about earlier on between us as a team, to find out what the actual trigger process is. What is it that's triggering the anxiety, the feeling of failure, or the feeling that the future is going to go wrong? Very simply, the future is going to go wrong. That's the preamble. We have an understanding. We feel as though the future is going to go wrong, so the outcome's going to be bad. Does that make sense? I feel as though I'm going to fail my exam, so I'll be anxious as I get closer to the exam time. Now, what you'll realize is that when you're in the exam, you tend to have those moments when you've started to realize you have the answers, and then you'll start to get past your anxiety by filling out the answer correctly, and then the anxiety is a thing of the past. So the reality here is, first step is to seek help and to realize that there could be something very simple and humble that could trigger your anxiety, or trigger your sense of I am about to fail. The parishani, if you're talking about Punjabi, the agla kaam karne lage, oh kharab hone wala hai. So that's what happens in our brain. So the first step is to realize that there is a trigger. The second step is to go through the conscious breathing. Yeah. So wherever you're doing, whichever way you're doing it, don't worry about the style of breathing, what it is. It's just become aware of your body's breath in and breath out. That's all you're trying to do. And that basically is something that you do immediately. As you feel the onset of that butterfly feeling and the onset, you literally remove yourself from that position and that place. If it's in the middle of a conversation in a closed room, then just request, is it okay if I just pop out for a second? I need to go to the toilet or a break. And if you're in a car, then in that particular point, just go silent. Don't retaliate if there's in the middle of an argument type thing. So all you've got to do is say, and we start with if it's an argument, you start with an agreement frame. So you just say, I agree, okay, yeah, and take a few deep breaths. And then the third step, sorry, just to beg your pardon there, the third step is to ensure that you do this immediately, to break that pattern.
Tariq, the caller who was trying to get through wanted to talk about bipolar depression. So
Okay.
literally 30 seconds.
30 seconds on bipolar depression.
That's
I'd say that's a very big subject. If the caller, good evening to you, whoever that caller is, is it the person themselves who is suffering with that, or has a relative that's suffering with bipolar
What we'll do is,
Answer both ways.
just to let you know, there'll be calls. Tariq and Suki will be here afterwards. So if you get any calls, we will take them after the show, and we can speak to you from there. Got a few minutes before we come to an end.
In terms of managing it both ways, we can basically say the patient who's the person who's got the bipolar depression really needs to be properly medicated, seek help from GP, make sure that they're taking their medication on time. It's a very, very difficult disorder to live with, because obviously we've got lots of swings in either direction. It's trying to keep that person in the middle through the medication and through talking therapy. For the person living with the bipolar, seek some support from either talking therapy or some counselling. Definitely get some support with this. Don't suffer on your own in silence, because there are lots and lots of support groups for this, in terms of being able to talk to other people who are family members and loved ones of people with bipolar.
Could I just add something to that?
Sure.
It's not necessarily just about bipolar, but I really want everybody to understand something, that you need one person, that's it, just one person who is there for you and listens to you. Does that make sense? That person doesn't have to be within the family. If you're not getting the support from the family, step out of the family and just realize that you're worth it. Put a bit of effort, love and care into yourself, and say it is your time as well. So this life is given to us with a gift of every individual having equal opportunity to be happy and to be at one with themselves. So it's your time to, if you feel that you're uncomfortable, you just need one person, reach out to whoever it is, one of us here in the group, and I'm very, very certain we'll give you that honsla, that support to move you forward into life. It just takes one person to believe in you, and that's all we're looking for. And so reach out. The first step for anybody who's listening on who's getting any kind of disorder of any kind is first things first, brilliant that you're actually spending time watching programs like this to realize that there could be a possibility in your life. And the second step is now to reach out and find one person to help you. Whether it's in your family, it's not a problem. And don't be worried about the outcome to the izzat of the family, the respect to the family, etc. This is your life, and it's worth it. You are worth the efforts there. So that's my humble opinion in Maharaj the Gift.
Tariq, just summarising today, one message to take away for the viewers at home who have talked to us or listened to us about anxiety. So.
I think the most important thing is, certainly from my perspective, would be my key message to the people watching would be, you don't have to live with anxiety. It's something that can be you can get support with. It doesn't have to be a part of your life unless you want it to be. Absolutely look to get some support from other people. As Suki was saying, it doesn't have to be necessarily a counsellor. Just get somebody out there who wants to listen to you, and that's the beginning of the process. You can start going to therapy if you want, if that's appropriate. But certainly, if it's having a very negative effect on your life, seek help. Talk to your GP. Seek some help from maybe a charity or the BACP, or another great organisation is Anxiety UK. That's anxietyuk.org.uk. That's anxietyuk.org.uk. Give them a call. There's specialist therapists who can help you with that. But you don't have to live with it. And I think the important thing is try, if we can get to a point where we can understand the anxiety, understand what the causes are, look at what the triggers are, and help you to get to a better place where we are looking over that cliff and seeing the Grand Canyon, or we're going to an exam and not thinking we're going to fail, but actually say to the examiner, look, I'm amazing, and here's what I know, and I want to show you. And that's a much more healthy place to be.
Wow, that's a very, very powerful message there for you guys.
One final say, if I can just share something. Anxiety is not to be eradicated from your life, because anxiety also makes you feel, I was anxious before I came on air today. Anxiety should be a part of your life in the sense of embracing it. Allow it to get the best out of you. Once you started to speak. When I was younger, I used to... I'm quite a tough character, but even when I'm speaking just before a business meeting or a sale of some kind, I'd have that slight butterfly in my stomach. Now, that's okay, because it just means that I care. When I was younger, I got told that, if you don't feel, I do a lot of public speaking these days, and I do a lot of private trainings and with CEOs. If you don't feel that anxiety to start off with, you really don't care. Your feelings out of the emotion. You don't want to be like a mechanical machine. That's not being human. So actually embrace anxiety to a certain level and allow it to be a part of your life and not to be your life. Does that make sense? You don't have to live with it. So in a very humble way, we are in accordance with our Sikhi Guru Bani, Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. It says very, very clearly that these sort of problems are in every single household. So don't think that your household is one full of shame if you step up and say we're having these sort of emotional challenges with the family. We are a part of a community, and our Bani teaches us that it's every single family, it's not one. So, dukh, daru, sukh, rog, paya. The reality is that we need a balance of yin and yang in both of our levels of life. So accept it, embrace it, and be the best you can possibly be in Waheguru Kir Padma.
Just want to say to all the viewers at home a very, very big thank you for watching our show today. We've had two fantastic guests who have been sharing their expertise, their knowledge. A big thank you to both Suki and to Tariq for coming on today's show.
Thank you, Adam.
Talking about what we're doing. So a big thank you to you.
Thank you so much.
Gracing your presence on Mental Health Matters. Guys, just want to say a big thank you to the people who've called in. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, but hopefully we managed to sort them out. Suki and Tariq will be still available after the show for any questions. So if you do have any questions, they'll be here to help them through. If you need to talk to anyone, both Suki or afterwards, please contact on Sangat TV, and we can then let you go from there. Anxiety. Live with it, work with it, and help manage it. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.